Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a new week of programming here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is a Monday. It is the 11th day of April in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you today. This Friday is the infamous 15th of April, which of course is Income Tax Day, and we kind of know that. I think all of us, if you hadn't realized that yet, please take it seriously. It's a day that a lot of people don't look forward to. Most of the people that don't mind doing their taxes have already done them because they're going to get some sort of a refund. The people who aren't are waiting until the last minute, and I don't blame them as well. Welcome to today's program. I hope that your weekend was an enjoyable one. We had here in West Virginia, we had a pretty active weekend. The statewide Democratic conventions were held in every county here in West Virginia this past Saturday, and I was privileged to attend one. And it's kind of exciting because the one issue on the table obviously were the fall elections here in West Virginia, and since I'm directly involved in those, I was very, very interested in the meetings and the results and all of that, and I feel kind of lucky, honored that I was selected as one of the delegates to represent our county in the statewide convention in Charleston in June, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm really eager to go, and I want to see it all. I mean, this is my one shot, really, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. So I'm really looking forward to it. Again, welcome to another week of programming here at the Virtual Center. I do want to begin today's program once we get through with the housekeeping, phone numbers, email addresses, and those kinds of things. I'd like to go back a little bit to where we were last week on a couple of issues. And I don't know quite how long that will take, but it might take a bit of time. And I'd like to, if possible, finish before we conclude today's program here at the Virtual Center. I'd like to complete Washington's farewell address. I really believe that that document is incredibly important. It appears in a lot of the publications, a lot of the anthologies of key documents and key articles related to the period of early American history. Washington's farewell address is usually included in there. Most of the reason for that is because of the foreign policy information in Washington's address. What a lot of people don't realize is that the foreign policy portion of the farewell address is at the very end. And so I would say the beginning of the first 75% of Washington's farewell address deals very specifically with the issue of parties. And that's what we dealt with when we touched upon it, when we dealt with it last week in our last program together last Wednesday. I'd like to return to that and review some of the issues from that, and then go on, hopefully, and get to the foreign policy issues as well, because I think they are also very, very important. We would love to hear from you. I know our listeners would. The best programs that we've done here at the Virtual Center, and I can almost say this without fail, the comments that I've heard, the programs that people felt that they got the most out of, are the programs where there has been discussion and back and forth dialogue with a caller. And we've had a number of examples of that. They tend to make for a richer program because when different people are thinking on the same subject, and coming at it sometimes frequently from different directions, the result is that everybody benefits. It seems like everybody leaves the experience knowing a little bit more than they did when they came in. And that's really what this is about. So if you are inclined to offer your thoughts about the nature of America's two-party system in its origins, and we'll begin there, I think, today, or the issue of Washington's farewell address and the issue of parties, whatever the issue is that you feel that you've got something substantive and meaning to say, whether it's consideration, a suggestion, a question, or whatever, we would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to drop me an email and share your thoughts that way, I would love to hear from you, and I'll reserve the right. And if indeed you do that, and there's something in your comments that I think our listeners would benefit from, then I'll put it on the air for you if you don't mind me doing that. If you'd rather I not, then all you need to do is say that in the email, and I obviously will honor your request. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, lowercase, all one word, @gmail.com. And finally, I want to mention our Facebook page. We've been talking about the Facebook page now for the last 6 months or so. If you are a user of Facebook and you go to the homepage, in the search box, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our Facebook page. This weekend, I believe Friday, I posted an item on our Facebook page on the issue of two parties. I want to share that particular issue with you as our first item out of the gate today, so to speak. But it is on the Facebook page. So, if you are intrigued by some of the things that we'll be saying in a moment about the origins of our two-party system, most specifically the vision and the principles associated with our two-party system as they relate to James Madison, then I do invite you to go to our Facebook page, and you can, if you're proficient at copying and pasting on your computer, then you can copy and paste and have your own permanent copy of this particular piece if you'd like. So again, if you just go to the homepage on Facebook, and in the search box, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. I might just make a comment to open the program. Bob and I were chatting about this before we went on the air. Bob was apologetic today for not having any music in our introduction. He said we would be opening the program cold today because in rebooting the computer, he was unable to get the music ready for the lead into the program. It's really interesting when you do hear that music every day and then suddenly it's not there. You really do miss it. And it is kind of cold when suddenly this voice appears to introduce the program on the Virtual Center. So I appreciate Bob, and I appreciate all that they do to help us keep this program on the air. You'll recall that the week before last in our programs, and early last week as well, we were dealing with the origins of American two-party system. And basically what we were talking about is the shift or the transition in thinking about parties from looking at them as exclusively a negative into the gradual realization and appreciation of parties as a positive in American society. And specifically, when we say as a positive, what we mean is so organizing our two-party system in America that rather than reflect divisions in our society, the nature of our two-party system is to overcome those divisions and find the basis of compromise on which those divisions can put aside their differences and unite around things that they agree on. And that, as many of us realize, is a feature of America's two parties. It has long been that way, and it has continued to function that way. And one of the things, and this is basically more than anything else, this is what political scientists spend most of their time doing, is looking at the elections as they unfold. The presidential elections every 4 years, and the so-called off-year elections in between every 2 years. And looking for patterns and looking for explanations in order to try to find reasons to explain why the voters seem to be acting or behaving in the way that they do. And much of the literature associated with political science is related to that particular enterprise. One of the things we note, for example, and the political scientists have emphasized this for some time, is that not only does our two-party system promote moderation by bringing people together and putting an emphasis on compromise, on reaching across the aisle, as the phrase goes, on deliberation and negotiation, and trying to emphasize more the things that unite rather than the things that divide, and building coalitions of constituent groups, various interest groups, which find that they can unite around various principles on a temporary basis for the purpose of winning elections. And that's really the basis on which our two-party system has functioned for a long time, and very honestly functioned pretty well. One of the things that has become clear through the years, and I think many of us recognize this fact, is that not only does our two-party system promote compromise, but the fact of the matter is our two-party system works at its best when there is a competitive situation, real competition between the two parties. I can remember years and years ago when I was in college, a political science instructor that I had, whose class I remember very well. It was a good class. And she used to make the point all the time about the very term politics. And she used to make the point that politics is really comes into play only when there's real competition, when there's something to deliberate, something to debate, something to negotiate on, something to base compromise on. In any kind of an electoral situation, when the vote is 75% to 25% or 60% to 30% or whatever, there's really no politics involved at all. It's just a matter of those people supporting one position on one side and those supporting the other position on the other, and the balance is not very great. In other words, there's a distinct imbalance between one side and the other. Politics, however, only happens when the differences between the two are 51% versus 49%. In other words, it's when the choice is a toss-up, so to speak. That's when real politics happens. That's when politics comes into play. That's when the real politicians show their stuff. Because when the decision could go either one way or the other way, that's when the politicians have to step up and find ways to make sure that it goes their way rather than the other way. That's where the real politics happen, when it's close, not when it's one-sided. And so, in a sense, that pretty well speaks to the point that I want to make. I think it's quite important. But the fact of the matter is, as we look back on our elections, what we find is that our system works at its best when there is real competition, when there really is a choice. It's when one side so overwhelmingly defeats the other side that our two-party system seems to be in trouble. Because invariably what happens after that vote, when the majority wins by such a huge amount, is that within the majority there tends to be division and dissension. The need for compromise, the need to unify is gone when the result is so overwhelming for one side or the other. When unity and compromise really matters is when the contest is a real contest. And so what we find, what political scientists have found looking at previous elections, is that when one party or the other wins an overwhelming victory, that usually spells the beginning of problems for the victorious party. Because usually what will happen is that the victorious party will find itself splintering or breaking up into various groups. Because the driver that produces unity is not there anymore. And so what we found is that what political scientists find is that the closer the election, the more viable our two-party system is, and the more that real politics comes into play, politics being deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. And that's the system that James Madison created in the early 90s, and I'm giving him full credit for that, and that's probably not fair. But there's no question, this is the way of thinking that we've seen in James Madison by looking at the Federalist Papers, in looking at number 10, number 51, number 39, some of the more prominent pieces of the Federalist Papers written by James Madison. What we begin to see is this internal balance, this internal structure of checks and balances in order to promote deliberation and promote compromise. There's no question that really is the driving force achieved in the ratification in the Constitution of the United States. It creates an environment which promotes compromise. It also creates an environment, because it does promote compromise, which encourages and rewards representatives for their willingness and their ability to meet together and deliberate and negotiate. And it's that kind of behavior on the part of representatives that Madison believes would set the example for voters, for citizens. When citizens see representatives behaving as they should behave, as the system dictates that they ought to behave, then Madison believes that citizens will quickly begin to appreciate and realize the character traits, the qualities that they should be looking for in candidates in future elections. And so the thinking is that as the system matures, the citizens themselves will be receiving a civic education, if you will, from their own elected representatives and from the system. The system working as it was designed to work provides an ongoing education to the citizenry at large. And Madison's thinking is that citizen behavior, the way they vote and who they vote for, will pretty much be a function of the civic education they receive from the behavior of their elected representatives. And that particular behavior is driven by national issues as opposed to local issues. Madison believes that at the very top, at the most important levels, which is the national level, representatives in Congress and appointees of administrations of presidents and the way they behave will become the model for citizen education and citizen behavior to follow. And one of the key elements of that behavior is going to be, it will be a willingness to put aside or suspend local interests, self-interest, on behalf of the major interests that most directly affect the public interest, the citizens at large. And once you get a group of representatives able to put their heads together to address the major public interest issues which confront the nation, that's when the two-party system will function as it was designed to function. And what we've been looking at here at the Virtual Center at the beginning of last week and the week prior to that is the actual historical transition in the nation's attitude toward parties, which reflected the transition or the change from parties as a negative to parties as a positive good. And if you'll recall, I had shared here at the Virtual Center a piece that I wrote on the role that James Madison played in that transition. And one of the things that I was trying to prove was that despite the fact that he's criticized, that Madison was criticized for not seeing the logical application of his own thoughts as they applied toward the Constitution and were written into the Federalist Papers, those same principles applied to the emergence of parties in the 19th century. And Madison was taken to task by primarily Richard Hofstadter, the noted political scientist, political philosopher, actually. Madison was taken to task for seemingly not envisioning or not seeing the transition and the application of these principles in the emergence of two parties during the 1790s. It was my belief that Madison did indeed see that particular phenomenon, and that Hofstadter and others who agree with him were a bit unfair in their criticism of Madison. And I had spent a lot of time looking at two pieces that Madison had written in 1792 for the National Gazette. The first one was written in January, in which Madison lays out a strategy or a formula that he believes government must follow in order to assure that republicanism in America will work. And then later in the year, in September, in what he calls a candid state of parties in America, Madison writes an expose of the extent to which the nation seems to be dividing into two parties, driven principally by the priorities of the wealthy as opposed to the priorities of the people at large. And Madison's position is that the program, the economic program being promoted by the George Washington administration based on specific recommendations from Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, was dividing the nation and directly threatening the future of republicanism in America. And obviously that situation seems to set the stage for the gradual transition in the way parties are viewed. Because Madison says straight up, parties are inevitable. Self-interest is inevitable. In Federalist number 10, Madison had said that factions are sown into the nature of man. In 1792, January, he writes that parties are inevitable. This split is natural, especially in popular governments. And we're going to have to find some way to address it. One of the things that I think all of us need to pause on for a moment and recognize is how incredibly profound this transition is. To look at parties as divisions, organized interest groups within society, and therefore, because they are so divisive, they are a negative. And then to turn that around 180 degrees and make the adjustments necessary to turn that negative into a positive that does unite. Think about it. A transition which involves taking divisions and using them as vehicles to promote unity. Creating unity out of division, out of separation, out of hostility. That is an incredibly profound transition. So I think we need to appreciate that. And I will say that Richard Hofstadter deserves credit for that, because in his book, The Ideal of a Party System, Hofstadter does make the point as to how incredibly visionary and profound the nature of the modern two-party system in America is. It took a negative, which was inevitable, and found ways to turn it into a positive, which is incredibly creative. When I presented the paper here in the Virtual Center at the end of the program's week before last, I found at the very last minute that I was overplaying my hand. I guess that's the best way to say it. That what I was doing was I was allowing my commitment to Madison's vision, my faith or my belief in Madison's understanding and vision. And I was letting that drive my interpretation of the evidence. To put it another way, I was claiming that the evidence supported something that it really didn't support. And so the last program, last week, in which we dealt with this was early in the week. And what I basically mentioned was that I would have to go back to the drawing board. And I would have to revise that conclusion, or indeed find evidence, more solid evidence, to back it up. And I believe I shared with you here on the air that I was still convinced that there was so much wisdom in Madison that it's really hard to believe that he didn't see what Hofstadter accuses him of not seeing. I just couldn't believe that Madison, whose understanding and the depth of whose understanding is probably greater than anybody else's at the time, I just couldn't imagine that other people early in America's history are going to see this and make the adjustments necessary to make the transition happen. It just didn't make sense to me that Madison didn't see it. And over the years, as I've thought about that, I pretty well convinced myself that there must be evidence there to prove it because it made so much sense. The fact of the matter is, I wrote an article. I was prepared to submit it for publication. And when we put it on the air, and I shared with you the evidence, I realized right there that I couldn't prove what I was saying I was proving. That there was more thought and more research necessary. And I believe I admitted that on the air. I intended to. Because in doing that, I violated one of my key principles of research. And that is that the evidence must drive the conclusion cannot drive the evidence. If the conclusion you want to reach is the driver, then that's going to cause you to cherry pick the evidence and emphasize only those things which support you and ignore evidence that might contradict you. And that is invalid research. That is manipulating the evidence to support an agenda, a preconceived agenda. I've focused on that for all the time we've been on the air here at the Virtual Center. And I found myself guilty of it. And when I realized that that's indeed what I was doing, I felt like in order to be honest to myself, I had to acknowledge it, own up to it, and deal with it. And I believe I did. After our last program this past Wednesday, I took to the internet on Thursday and began to look at the sources more carefully and more closely. I began to look at many of Madison's letters to see whether, in fact, there was additional evidence in Madison that backed up my point. And one of the things I began to realize is that indeed, analysis and reflection of the evidence that I was able to compile, to my mind, does indeed suggest that this criticism of Madison for not seeing the obvious is indeed misplaced. And what I wanted to do today at the opening of our program, so we can finally put this issue to rest, I hope, is share with you a different conclusion on this particular issue. I believe one that is more valid, that has more substance. And in fact, I'm so convinced that indeed I've resolved the issue that over the weekend on Saturday, I did submit this for publication. So if it's published, I'm going to have to live with the results. So again, a lot of it I didn't necessarily, I went through the entire article and rewrote portions of it. I'm not going to go all the way back to all of those again. What I will do is go back to the second publication of Madison's, which is September of 1792, in his Candid State of Parties in America, in which Madison defines or explains the two parties that are in existence in America in late 1792. Madison says there are two groups in this major division in American politics. The first group, Madison says, consists of those who are more partial to the opulent than to the other classes of society, the opulent being the wealthy, and debauch themselves or seduce themselves into believing that mankind are incapable of governing themselves. These elitists, if you will, that's really what Madison is calling them, are convinced, and I'm quoting Madison here directly, are convinced that government can be carried on only by the pageantry of rank, the influence of money and emoluments, and the terror of military force. In other words, what distinguishes this group, which is the minority, the wealthy, is that this group firmly believes that only they are qualified to make the major political decisions that this society needs, that the vast majority of people are unqualified and incapable of governing themselves. Their ultimate goal, Madison says, is to persuade the citizenry, the masses of the people, that government itself may by degrees be narrowed into fewer hands and approximated to a hereditary form. The result, Madison believes, the demise of the Constitution of the United States, and with it, popular government in America. That's how serious Madison sees the agenda, the priorities of the wealthy. That's what Madison believes drives the upper classes, that they are driven to take back power from the people that the Republic gives them and resume in the hands of the elite the traditional powers that upper classes have always exercised in successful societies. That's the first group. That group is the threat. The other group, the other division, Madison's explained, is comprised of those who believe in man's ability to govern himself, who find distasteful the arrogance that seems always to come with rank and wealth. Their mission, this group, the majority of the people, to save republicanism. These men, Madison says, are naturally offended at every public measure that does not appeal to the understanding and the general interests of the community, or that is not strictly conformable to the principles and conducive to the preservation of Republican government. So in a sense, the way Madison is writing, there's two groups. One is made up of the wealthy who want to take back power. The other group represents the majority of the people who have been given power under republicanism in a Republican government. And from Madison's perspective, the elite, the wealthy, who seek to destroy Republican government by taking power back into the hands of the few, literally threaten the future of the Republic. They threaten this nation. So from Madison's perspective, it appears to be a struggle between the good guys and the bad guys. Now I've written a little bit of analysis. This is my own analysis of what the situation seems to be. Madison's candid state is political, I've said, no question. But so long as we agree that republicanism is the only way to go, it remains ideological as well. You may remember that earlier on, I had made the point that Madison, in his first letter, when he lays out the formula for preserving Republican government, That seems to be the more ideological, the more philosophical Madison. It's hard to see the politician, the political Madison in that. It's so ideological. But in this second letter, in the Candid State of Parties in America, Madison reveals the political nature of the situation as well as the ideological. The political Madison is becoming more visible. But even though it's clearly political, good guys versus bad guys, if we agree that republicanism is really the philosophy, the principle on which this government ought to function, then Madison's Candid State is ideological as well, because he's supporting the right side. To threaten republicanism, Madison is saying, is to do damage to the public interest, is to threaten the citizens of this nation. This good guy, bad guy perspective is very reminiscent of Madison's argument during the debates over the Constitution, when he, as much as anybody, was responsible for labeling the opponents of the Constitution anti-federalists. And we talked last week about this. If you are able to pin the label of antis on your opponents, they're anti-anything, whatever it is, that's a political advantage. And if you remember, the Federalists were very successful in seizing the name Federalists, which thereby gave them the opportunity to call the opponents of the Constitution the Anti-Federalists, which gave them a distinct political advantage. Madison is doing the same thing again, because in his article, he's talking about one group, the good guys, being called the Republicans, because most people believe that the Republic is right. The Republic is what America ought to be. So those who are Republicans are the good guys. And then he labels those who would destroy the Republic the anti-Republicans. And that's a political tactic. That's the political Madison more than the ideological Madison. And I think that's very important. What you call your enemy is very, very important tactically, strategically. So the political Madison begins to surface in the labeling of the anti-Republicans, the opponents of Republican government, as well as Madison's closing suggestion in this document that, quote, a common sentiment and a common interest will overcome artificial distinctions and likely produce a Republican victory in the end. Madison acknowledges in this article, in his Candid State, that the Republicans, the good guys, are the majority. They have the numbers. The other side has the money. They have the intrigue. They're the manipulators. They're the strategists. But the Republicans have the numbers. And Madison believes that because they have the numbers, once they appreciate the fact that they have a common sentiment and a common interest, they will be able to overcome the artificial distinctions which separate them. They'll be able to join together, produce a Republican majority, and take power. that speculative conclusion, when Madison speculates an ultimate Republican victory because of their numbers, he's being political. Then I've gone on and said a few other things, and these are my observations. Madison's operative assumption, of course, is that party is faction. In this case, moneyed interests organized against the public interest. Party is bad because party is faction. And in this case, party is the wealthy organized against the people, the public interest. To threaten Republican government, Madison believes, is then to do damage to the public interest. To do anything negative to weaken or destroy Republican government in America is contrary to the public interest. So Madison indeed is operating on the assumption that republicanism is right. Republicanism is the good. Another observation, which I think is quite accurate, the term party, faction, always applies to the others, never to you. It's the other guys who are a party. You're standing for the right, for the good. But there's no recognition in Madison that you also are a party. But you are. And the fact that he projects your ultimate victory is an indication that he does recognize that the Republicans are also a party. That indeed we do have two parties. Even though he uses the negative label of party always against the others. In 1796, Alexander Hamilton would respond to Madison in kind by using Washington's farewell address to criticize what he called the baneful effects of the spirit of party that were challenging the people's freely elected government. Hamilton does in Washington's farewell address the same thing that Madison does in his candid state. Namely, he hurls the negative of party at the other guys. And Hamilton's position is what we are doing in this administration is enacting programs and policies in accordance with the public interest because the people elected us. We are freely elected by the people to define the public interest for all the people. And we are doing it in our policies and programs. And for people to organize against that constitutes what Hamilton calls the baneful effects of party. To Hamilton, organized opposition to a government freely elected was tantamount to treason. It was no different than instigating insurrection. And this is where Hofstadter's criticism of Madison comes in. Hofstadter, in his idea of a party system, and if you happen to have that book or you want to go online, this quote is from pages 72, 73 in Hofstadter's book. Hofstadter says that envisaging parties as limited, homogeneous, fiercely aggressive special interests, Madison failed to see. He failed to see, says Hofstadter, that the parties themselves might become great, bland, enveloping coalitions, eschewing the assertion of firm principles and ideologies, embracing and muffling the struggles of special interests, or that they might forge the coalitions of majorities that are in fact necessary to effective government into forces sufficiently benign to avoid tyranny and sufficiently vulnerable to be displaced in time by the opposing coalition. Translation, Hofstadter criticizes Madison because he really doesn't see the full potential of two parties in America that other people were going to see later on. I have to take issue with that. I think that criticism of Madison is unfair. Obviously, he recognizes that there are two parties, but politically, he's using the label of party against the bad guys, against the other side. That makes perfect political sense. But to deny that Madison recognized the potential of two parties in America is, I believe, unfair. My conclusion, it is here in the early 1790s, with each side hurling accusations of disloyalty and treason at the other side, that the logic of a permanent party system like that defined by Hofstadter was most likely to emerge. It stands to reason that the two-party system, as Hofstadter defines it, becomes the obvious solution to the split that Madison is defining in his candid state of parties in America. This is the perfect situation for the logic of a permanent party system like that defined by Hofstadter to emerge. And then I've mentioned that in England, Bolingbroke, in his idea of a patriot king, Edmund Burke, David Hume, all of them had recommended the positives of a two-party system. But they saw it more as a check on government power than as a mechanism to moderate political differences between groups of citizens. So even though they recognized the benefits of what they called a loyal opposition or a legitimate opposition, they saw it principally as a check on government. They didn't see it necessarily as a two-party system that from election to election would constantly throw power back and forth and thereby moderate citizens by focusing all their attention on the next election. Madison, I believe, in a candid state, projected a permanent Republican Party as a vehicle, and this is a quote from his document, from his candid state, as a vehicle for banishing every other distinction than that between enemies and friends to Republican government, and in promoting a general harmony among the latter, wherever residing, however employed. Madison seemed to see before others did, I believe, the prospects of and a framework for a national party system to come, anticipating an ongoing struggle between big money and the people, between stratagem and numbers. He closed the candid state on an optimistic note, predicting, quote, that no tempered observer of human affairs will be surprised if the issue in the present instance should be reversed, and the government be administered in the spirit and form approved by the great body of the people, unquote. Thomas Jefferson's election in 1800 termed the Revolution of 1800 by so many, did not shock Madison. He had predicted it. And the famous line in Jefferson's first inaugural address, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," Madison had predicted that as well. In other words, Madison saw people coming together and putting aside their differences in order to unite temporarily to eventually take power. Madison saw this. He saw the harmonizing effect of politics. And therefore, when Jefferson was elected in 1800 and called for compromise by saying we're all Republicans and we're all Federalists, Madison had already anticipated that. And therefore wouldn't have been shocked at all. My conclusion: America's parties did indeed function pretty much according to script for most of their history. Today, parties are, if possible, even more polarized, demanding absolute ideological purity. They see compromise as heresy, discussion as uncertainty, negotiation as weakness. Madison's unity priorities seem mostly in retreat, replaced by an emotional, non-negotiable array of issues that inflame voters and discourage discourse. Madison knew that inflexible, line-in-the-sand issues, where total agreement was the only option, where there was no room for compromise, had no place in the political debate. These were matters of conscience, Madison believed. Their resolution required that they stay there. They were issues that could only divide, never unite. It's time we listened. I believe that Madison's major criticism of our two-party system today and the polarization that exists between Republicans and Democrats, between those tending toward the extreme right and those moving further and further toward the extreme left, what is driving that polarization and the inability of government to govern, because those who would reach across the aisle for compromise and negotiation are viewed as weak, are viewed as sellouts, are ruled as two-faced. Madison would say that the reason we have the situation we've got today is because our candidates, our political leaders, are emphasizing issues like same-sex marriage, abortion, right to life, guns, the right to carry. Very emotional issues which divide people. There's no room for negotiation on abortion. If you believe that abortion is murder, then there's no negotiation possible. The only thing you can look toward is people agreeing with you. If they don't, then you write them off as immoral, as unchristian, and you want nothing to do with them. Madison's position would be that those kinds of what I've called line-in-the-sand issues always divide, never unite. Therefore, they have no place in our political debate. They should not even be discussed in our politics. They are matters of conscience. They're issues that people themselves must make the decisions on. That's where the answers are, And that's where these issues should remain. If we will listen to the wisdom of the founders, we will begin to realize that they knew what they were talking about. Unfortunately, there are people who seem to have everything to gain politically by not encouraging people to even know what the founders said on these issues. They are making political hay by putting words in the mouth of the founders. And we need to see that. I think we've reached the top of our first hour. We've just gone a couple of minutes beyond it. It's 3 minutes after the hour. So this is a good time to pause and take our 5-minute break. I want to thank you for supporting the Virtual Center. I want to encourage you to stay with us. We'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes with our second hour. Please stay with us. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Welcome to our second hour in this Monday program here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Monday. It is the 11th day of April in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you on this absolutely gorgeous day, at least here in Appalachia. We are experiencing sunshine and warm temperatures in the low 60s, I believe. So it's a beautiful day out there as I look out the windows as we do our program today. I do invite you to participate actively in our program by sharing your thoughts with our other listeners. We have a phone number dedicated to just that purpose. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. It might be a good idea to jot that number down so that if you do have a thought or something you would like to share with our listeners, then by all means you'll have the number right at the ready. Again, it is 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate with us that way, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, all lowercase, all one word, at gmail.com. And let me share with you again that our Facebook page, the last item posted, is the piece that we just completed in our first hour, which is on the nature of two parties. I believe that is a very, very good way to open or to launch our consideration of George Washington's farewell address. Most responsibly, or most especially, because I recognize that 75%, the first 75% of Hamilton's document, pretty much in the farewell address. Much of the most significant aspects of it were written by Alexander Hamilton. And so Hamilton's political perspective in defense of his economic program is really driving what Washington says in the farewell address about parties. This is Hamilton's opportunity to respond to the criticisms of the Republican opposition, which has emerged in the House of Representatives through the leadership, in large part, of James Madison. And by the time we get to the mid-90s, 1795, 1796, Republican organization has spread nationwide, and there's a real emerging two-party system in America. It is during Washington's farewell address in 1796 which is written on the occasion of Washington's decision to not seek a third term as president, that Hamilton uses the occasion to criticize the Republican opposition in America. And much of this we looked at in our last program this past Wednesday. And so therefore, much of this is in the context of review, and I want to approach it that way. I don't want to spend the entire hour going back over the things that we dealt with in our previous program. Let me just say, if you recall, that the very first issue that the farewell address takes on after Washington makes his salutary introduction, in which he explains reasons why he chose to not run for re-election. The very first substantive issue in the farewell address is the issue of national unity under the Constitution of the United States. The emphasis for the first couple of pages of the farewell address is in the distinct benefits of unity that Washington believes the nation is benefiting from. The people ratified the Constitution. The people voted for, after much debate and much decision-making and much deliberation, the people voted on the Constitution of the United States as setting up a government to enact or implement Republican government in America. Hamilton believes. Washington believes. Therefore, the policies of that government, a freely elected government by the people, naturally is that a freely elected government exercising or defining the public interest for the nation at large. That's really what Hamilton believes Republican government is all about. The people choose their representatives, and the representatives make policy in the interests of the people. Hamilton believes that's what popular government in America is about. That's what the Washington administration is about, Hamilton believes. And he also believes that anyone who would disagree or take issue with the policies and the programs of the people's government is an enemy to the Republic. So basically what Hamilton is doing is taking issue with the assumptions and the conclusions drawn by James Madison in defending the legitimacy of the emerging Republican opposition that exists in his 1792 document. I think what we have here is a clear illustration of two different approaches towards Republican government in America. The basis of the two-party system and a defense of each. Republicanism by James Madison, and now the Hamilton program as official policy of the Washington administration in Washington's farewell address. The first issue that Hamilton emphasizes then is the unity of the nation under the Constitution of the United States. And more specifically, the issue that he takes on and criticizes is the inclination on the part of many people to continue.
Senator, this region has seen a decades-long decline in manufacturing, and with that,
to continue. Excuse me, we've got some interference on the line. I apologize.
how you would propose to sort of incentivize business and industry to come back and reinvest.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob.
What has gone on now for decades is large multinational corporations have shut down here in the United States, moved to low-wage countries abroad and brought their products back into this country. We have lost millions of decent paying jobs as a result of our disastrous trade policies. And And that is one of the areas where Secretary Clinton and I have strong disagreements. She has supported virtually all of these terrible trade agreements. I have opposed all of them. But changing our trade policy is one important way to revitalize manufacturing.
Apologize for the technological glitch where we had another program coming in and really creating confusion. I apologize for that. Basically, then, where we are is we have two different positions of political priorities within the Republic. And Hamilton is making the point on the issue of unity. So the first issue, naturally, that he would stress is the unity that exists within the nation. The fact that we are all Americans, the fact that we must all see ourselves first and foremost as Americans, that we recognize that this government and its policies are the government freely elected by the people to enforce or implement the public interest as defined by those representatives. And so what Hamilton is saying, although he doesn't say it in so many words, is that even if you have doubts about the fairness of the economic program being implemented from the capital, from the nation's capital, from Congress, the fact of the matter is all of it benefits the entire nation. And then what Hamilton does is emphasize the interdependency and the interconnectedness of the various regions and the various parts of the nation, and emphasizes the extent to which that one distinct region meets the needs of another distinct region and vice versa. The agriculture of the West supports the industry of the North. The industry of the North utilizes the agricultural products of the South, and the agriculture of the South forms the principal export in America's commercial enterprises. So in a sense, what Hamilton is doing in Washington's farewell address is emphasizing the unity and the interconnectedness that exists within America, and de-emphasizing or criticizing efforts to regionalize the nation by creating regional confederacies as an alternative to the national unity created by the Constitution. So Hamilton's view of the public interest is an interconnected union with a popularly elected government defining and carrying out the best interests of the public. What Washington is asking the people to do then is to defer criticism, line up behind the policies of their own government, and be very, very suspicious of those who would criticize it, who would regionalize it, who would emphasize the differences between regions, rather than see the interconnectedness and the interdependency of one region upon another. That's Hamilton's approach to government as opposed to Washington. He says in the farewell address, "The unity of government, which constitutes you one people, is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize." Basically, what Hamilton is doing is linking people's freedom, individual freedom, to the strength of the Union. The stronger the Union is, the freer the people are. The weaker the Union is, the more discord and chaos there is, the more threatened is the liberty of the people. It is, the farewell address says, it is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as the palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can be in any event abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. What Hamilton is doing is suggesting that the power of government and the freedom of individuals in the nation are all interconnected and interdependent on each other. Government's power depends on the degree to which people support it. And the degree to which people support results in the power of government, guarantees the strength of the individual freedom of our citizens. That's the model of government that Hamilton envisions and argues for. That's what Washington promotes in his farewell address. That's the basis of America's strength, is its union. Consequently, any threat to that union, to that synthesis, is a direct threat to government itself. It is insurrection. It is treason. I want to read this particular quote because I think it really speaks to that. While then, Washington says, every part of our country thus feels an immediate and particular interest in union, all the parts combined cannot fail to find in the united mass of means and efforts greater strength, greater resource, proportionately greater security from external danger, a less frequent interruption of their peace by foreign nations, and what is of inestimable value, they must derive from union an exemption from those broils and wars between themselves which so frequently afflict neighboring countries not tied together by the same government. And of course, what Washington uses as an example is Europe, the extent to which European nations go to war with each other because they aren't connected by a common government. Here in America, our states would be at war with each other were it not for the fact that they're part of the Union. And that's the strength that Washington emphasizes. And he says it's that strength, that unity, which means that we will be able to avoid the necessity of what he calls those overgrown military establishments, which under any form of government are inauspicious to liberty. In other words, our freedom as individuals is determined by the strength of our unity under the Constitution. This government, then, the farewell address says, this government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles, in the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim to your confidence and your support. Not only should you be able to rely on it, but by definition, you must support it, because its success depends directly on that support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. Your freedom as a person is guaranteed by the strength of this union. Therefore, you have an obligation to support it. That freedom does not give you the right to criticize it. So long as the Constitution of the United States is the law of the land, you have an obligation as a citizen to obey it. If the people in their wisdom choose to amend the Constitution, then change is fine. But short of that, you do not have the right to oppose or refuse to go along with its laws and its policies. Nor do you have the right to unite with others for that particular end either. The Constitution, which at any time exists until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. Your freedom comes from it, but your freedom does not extend to the right to oppose your own government. Therefore, Hamilton says, and this is the direct reference to the Republican opposition, all obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations, all associations, under whatever plausible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle and of fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation the will of a party, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans, digested by common counsels and modified by mutual interests. Those who would oppose government and its policies are factions. And if they are allowed to persist, then what government ends up doing will be the product of the power of factions on public policy, rather than the ability of public policy makers to make policy in the interests of the entire population. Combinations or associations of the above description, Washington says in his farewell address, may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and usurp for themselves the reins of government. Therefore, these factions must be opposed. Be very careful of those, he says, who in the name of supporting the Constitution and strengthening it, proposed alterations, amendments, which will impair the energy of the system and make it less effective. There are people who will do everything they can to convince you that the changes in structure by amendment that they recommend will enhance liberty. But in reality, because they weaken the power of government to govern, they threaten liberty. They directly jeopardize individual freedom. You must be able to spot it, and you must protect it. Washington says, liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed and adjusted, its surest guardian. Your liberty, the truest guardian of your freedom, is in a strong, vigorous government, not a weak one, not a dysfunctional one. Don't let anybody tell you different. He goes on and talks about the same thing that Madison points out, that this spirit of division, this self-interest, this idea of faction is inseparable from our nature. It has its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. He says the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. This leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and the miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. When factions become too prominent and too visible and too effective, they cause people to turn to strong leaders for security. What Hamilton is describing here is the situation that has given us Donald Trump. What people are looking for is a leader who will bring back the good old days when we were strong and we were weak and the world looked up to us. And as it seems more and more impossible that we're able to restore ourselves to that position of power and respect, we look to the individual who can take us there. And Donald Trump is promising us that America will be great again. He is fulfilling a national need. And he's extremely dangerous, because rather than reflect the result of a republic that is working, Trump represents the failings in a republic that isn't. And I think this is very significant. There is an opinion, Washington says, that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. Edmund Burke is arguing that in England. Bolingbroke argued it in the 17th century. David Hume in the 18th century says the same thing. There are those who believe that parties are permanent checks on government. But Washington's argument is when that government is the people's government, you don't need such a check. In fact, the freedom of the people depends on the strength and vigor of government, not on the checks on its ability to govern. Washington admits that within certain limits, this idea that parties can be good is probably true. And in governments of a monarchical caste, government unlike ours, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not favor, upon the spirit of party. But in those of popular character, in a popular government like ours, in governments which are purely elective, party is a spirit not to be encouraged. So what Washington is doing is shooting down, criticizing those who would defend party as a legitimate check, a loyal opposition against abuses by government. Hamilton's position is that the freedom of our people depends on the power and strength of government, not checks on that power and that strength. And then in one paragraph, which is often cited by those who seek to argue that America is a Christian nation, Washington goes directly to the issues of morality and religion and to the extent to which they are linked. The farewell address says the following: of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. That last line, that quote, is frequently used by those who are insisting that the founders, Washington specifically in his farewell address, was proposing a Christian nation. He was not. He was basically saying that in the kind of unity and symmetry that exists between popular government and its people, it requires a government which puts a premium on morality. Religions teach morality. Therefore, religion has a place within society at large. But keep in mind, Washington's priority here is not to promote religion. It is to explain ways in which religion supports political unity. It makes people more governable. It makes it easier to govern a society which values morality. And Washington is saying the society which values morality is the society which is at heart a religious society. Then he also goes into the issue of universal education, what he calls the general diffusion of knowledge. The reason we need a well-educated citizenry is because, quote, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. We need the opportunity to teach our citizens what we feel they must know in order to be good citizens. That, in the 18th century, is the purpose of public education. Not critical thinking, not a well-rounded education, not intellectual capacity, not the ability to get a good job, but the likelihood that an educated person will be a citizen who does the right things and opposes the wrong things. The purpose of our educational system is to teach the duties of citizenship. And the duties of citizenship are obedience to the law. Without going into detail, because we are at 43 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 15, 16 minutes left in today's program. The next issue that Hamilton addresses is the issue of taxes. The extent to which citizens paying taxes to the support of their government creates a sense of ownership. It makes citizens feel that they are part of the action. They help pay for it. They have a vested interest in what government does. In other words, what Hamilton is suggesting here is that the payment of taxes, this is very appropriate given the fact that we are in the week of April 15th, the payment of taxes is a positive thing for the strength of a republic and for the connection between government and its citizens. Therefore, Hamilton says, a very important source of strength and security requires that we cherish public credit. Government must be able to borrow money in order to promote the public interest, defend the nation in times of war, if necessary, go into debt, but avoiding the accumulation of debt as much as possible. The execution of these principles, these maxims, belongs to your representatives, Washington says, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. People need to realize, people must be taught the political benefits of paying taxes. To facilitate citizens in the performance of their duty, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts there must be revenue, that to have revenue there must be taxes, that no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant, that the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for a candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it. In other words, there is a positive value to paying taxes in terms of citizen loyalty. Hamilton makes that point. There is a very famous speech that Hamilton delivered in the New York legislature during the debates over the Constitution, in which Hamilton makes that point about taxes even more strongly. And it's at this point that Washington veers into the issue of foreign policy, and most especially warns the nation of getting involved in foreign intrigues, foreign situations, which jeopardize our freedom to pursue the best interests of this nation. Washington is not calling for isolation. On the contrary, he is calling for the very opposite of isolation. He is calling for a nation that is involved in the commerce of the world. But he says that the nation must be very careful not to tie itself in treaties to other nations and thereby allow ourselves to become satellites of those nations. That's his term. Satellites of larger nations, of stronger nations. We can't afford to do that. We must maintain our flexibility so that government can conduct foreign policy in the best interests of the nation. Therefore, Washington warns against too strong alliances with certain countries, that we become appendages of them. But at the same time, Washington warns against creating the idea that other nations are permanent enemies of ours, and we should always take a particular position against certain nations. Hamilton argues that both of those positions are wrong, that we must constantly operate to our own best interests. And that means, and I'm quoting here, America must observe good faith and justice towards all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? In order to be a free, enlightened, and at no distant period a great nation that gives mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. There's nothing more essential, Washington says, than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachment for other nations should be always excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another a habitual hatred or a habitual fondness is in some degree a slave to that other nation. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Therefore, Washington issues the defense of what we call no entangling alliances. Steer clear of permanent alliances, Washington says. But it's important to mention that toward the very end of the document, Washington makes it clear that staying clear of permanent entangling alliances is because of the situation America is currently in the 1790s. He defends the proclamation of neutrality that he issued on the 22nd of April, 1793, in the war between England and France. Taking sides in that war was tearing the nation apart between Federalists and Republicans. In the face of that division, that separation in America, Washington advocated neutrality and issued a proclamation to that effect. He defends it here, that America's best decision at present is to take a neutral position. This particular paragraph is critical in understanding Washington's thinking, Hamilton's thinking, in foreign policy. This is the third from the end of the farewell address. And this is what Washington says. The inducements of interest for observing that conduct will best be referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time to our country, to settle and mature its yet recent institutions, and to progress without interruption to that degree of strength and consistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Washington is saying here, Hamilton is saying, that our positions of always being neutral is because of the situation we currently find ourselves in. We have no option. If we tie ourselves to one side or the other, we become a slave to both of them. One becomes our permanent enemy, the other one becomes our permanent friend, and thereby incurs the option of interfering in our domestic institutions in ways that we don't want it to. Under the present circumstances, neutrality is our best option, Hamilton says. But it's temporary. Our ultimate goal is to gain time, is to strengthen our institutions, strengthen our consistency until we reach the point where we are in command of our own fortunes. When we get the power to call the shots, our foreign policy operations and decisions will be different than they are now. Despite those who argue the opposite, Washington is not advocating that America always take the position of neutrality. What he is advocating is that America always take the position that best serves its own interest. If it's neutrality, fine. If it's allying with one particular group or country or another particular country, fine. At some point in the future, Washington believes that America will have reached the point that it will have the power to make those kinds of decisions. But right now, Washington is saying, we don't have that power. Therefore, our only option is neutrality. Avoiding entangling alliances. Minimizing our flexibility. Denying ourselves the opportunity to make decisions in our own best interest. The implication here is that our time will come. Our goal is to acquire enough power and enough influence in the world to literally make the decisions which best serve us, and the power to back up those decisions. Washington is not advocating permanent neutrality in all foreign policy issues. And I think that's important to recognize. Last night, on 60 Minutes, there was a segment on the 9/11 Commission report. More specifically, on the missing section of that document related to the extent to which Saudi Arabia gave aid and comfort to the hijackers who flew the planes into the World Trade Center and the Capitol. Called the 28 pages. Those 28 pages have been redacted from the 9/11 Commission report. They are not being made public. They are being censored. Very few prominent congressmen and senators have read those 28 pages and are committed to not revealing what's in them. But the thinking is that they relate to America's unique relationship with Saudi Arabia. America's long-time relationship with Saudi Arabia has been driven by America's need throughout the years for access to oil. And the degree to which the Saudis control the production of oil, the prices of gasoline in the developed world. Because we were so dependent on oil, and thereby so dependent on the Saudis, that we were reluctant to say or do anything which would offend the Saudi government, meant that these 28 pages were redacted from the 9/11 report. The 60 Minutes report called for their release, called for making these available to the general public. That report on 60 Minutes last night is a classic example of not adhering to Washington's advice in the farewell address. Because we had reasons to maintain close relations with the Saudis, that meant that we were willing to look the other way, even when it came to supporting terrorists who flew planes into our buildings and killed 3,000 Americans. If that isn't another indication of our unwillingness to heed the advice of the founders, I don't know what is. On that note, I think it's safe to say that we have done justice to Washington's farewell address. And we have reached the end of our program today. I invite you to tune in again to the Virtual Center tomorrow. Remember, we will be beginning 1/2 hour later than today, 1:30 p.m. in the East. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you so much for listening.